My name is Ingrid Valerian, and for most of my 32 years, I've been the family ghost. A quiet whisper in the gilded, echoing halls of a legacy I was born into but never truly belonged to. My cousins, Genevieve and Alastair, the polished, pedigreed heirs to the once great house of Valerian, always saw me as a quaint little charity case, the girl who sewed her own clothes from thrift store scraps while they draped themselves in bespoke silks. They were on the brink of bankrupting our family's century-old fashion house, and tonight, on the evening of the Met Gala, they were pinning their last, desperate hopes on a phantom. They were watching from their marble-floored living room, praying for a glimpse of the anonymous designer behind Atelier Terra, the brand that had taken the world by storm. They never dreamed that the ghost they'd ignored for decades was about to become the most solid thing in the room. They had no idea that when the world's biggest star was asked about her breathtaking gown, she would turn, smile into the cameras, and point directly at me. Before I tell you exactly how the silence in my cousin's penthouse became so loud it could shatter glass, I want to welcome you to my story. It's a little bit about fashion, a lot about family, and mostly about finding your own voice when everyone around you is trying to tune you out. Please, let me know where in the world you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt underestimated or had your passion dismissed as just a little hobby, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe because this is a community for everyone who has ever had to build their own table when they weren't offered a seat at the family one. The House of Valerian wasn't just a brand, it was a mythology. It was founded in the 1920s by my great-grandmother, Elodie Valerian, a woman who could coax stories from fabric with nothing but a needle and thread. She was a true artisan, an alchemist who spun silk and audacity into wearable art. Her son, my grandfather, inherited her eye but not her fire, and he passed the business to his two sons, my uncle Julian and my father, Thomas. Julian was the businessman, sharp, ruthless, and obsessed with status. My father was the artist, a gentle soul with ink-stained fingers who loved the process more than the profit. The family, in its infinite and cruel wisdom, deemed Julian the worthy heir and Thomas the romantic liability. Julian's children, Genevieve and Alastair, were therefore groomed for the throne. My existence as Thomas's only child was treated as a footnote, a sentimental burden. We lived in a modest cottage on the far edge of the sprawling Valerian estate, a world away from the main house where my cousins grew up. My father had a small pension and my mother was a librarian. We weren't poor, not by any real measure of the word, but in the Valerian universe we were paupers. My earliest memories are steeped in the scent of my father's charcoal sketches and the hum of my mother's sewing machine. She was the one who taught me to sew, not with priceless bolts of fabric from the Valerian archives, but with faded floral curtains from flea markets and worn-out linen shirts from charity bins. For me, it was magic. It was taking something forgotten and giving it a new story. I remember one Christmas. I must have been 8 years old. I had spent a month hand-stitching a tiny, intricate gown for one of my dolls out of a scrap of velvet my mother had saved. The stitches were small and even, a testament to hours of childish concentration. I was bursting with pride. At the annual family Christmas gathering in the grand salon of the main house, surrounded by towering trees and the glint of crystal, I showed it to my grandmother. She held the tiny dress in her palm, her face softening. "Oh, Thomas, look," she said to my father, her voice warm with genuine admiration. "She has Elodie's hands." For a single, shimmering moment, I felt seen. I felt like a Valerian. Then, Genevieve, who was 10 and already a perfect miniature of her father's snobbery, sauntered over. She glanced at the doll's dress, her lip curling. "What's that?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's a dress I made," I whispered, my pride deflating like a pricked balloon. She let out a laugh, a sharp, ugly sound in the festive room. "It looks like a rag. Are you playing with rags now, Ingrid? Is that what you do in your little cottage?" Alastair, ever her echo, chimed in, "They don't have real toys. General, they have to make them out of garbage." My father's hand rested on my shoulder, a silent, pained apology, but the damage was done. The warmth in the room had vanished, replaced by the familiar chill of their condescension. That was the first time I understood that in their eyes, my creativity wasn't a gift. It was evidence of my lower status. This pattern repeated itself, becoming a cruel rhythm to our shared lives. When I was 16, there was a large family party to celebrate the company's 80th anniversary. Genevieve wore a new season Valyrian gown, a column of shimmering silver that probably cost more than our car. I, of course, had nothing to wear. So I went to my sanctuary, the local thrift store. I found a dated, unflattering bridesmaid's dress from the 80s, made of a heavy, beautiful quality satin in a dusty rose color. For 2 weeks, I worked on it every night. I deconstructed it completely, recutting the bodice, adding darts, and reshaping the voluminous sleeves into elegant, slender straps. I used the excess fabric to create a waterfall of delicate ruffles down the back. When I was done, it was a new creation, a dress that was uniquely mine. I felt beautiful in it. At the party, a woman I didn't know, a buyer from a major department store, stopped me. "That gown is exquisite," she said. "Is it Valyrian couture? I haven't seen it in the lookbooks." Before I could answer, Genevieve materialized at my side, a champagne flute in her hand. She gave the woman a dazzling smile. "Oh, this," she said, gesturing vaguely at me. "That's just Ingrid's little hobby. She's terribly clever, isn't she? Patches things together from old bits and bobs. It's darling, really. So quaint." She emphasized the word quaint as if it were a synonym for pathetic. The buyer's professional interest vanished, replaced by a look of polite pity. I felt my face burn, the beautiful dress suddenly feeling like a costume of shame. Another time, after my father passed away, my aunt, Genevieve and Alistair's mother, came to our cottage, ostensibly to offer condolences. My mother, heartbroken, was trying to sort through his things. I had just finished a project, a quilt I'd made for my mother from my father's old silk ties. It was a kaleidoscope of patterns and colors, each square a memory. I had it draped over a chair, and my aunt's eyes landed on it. "What on earth is that?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "I made it for Mom," I explained. "From Dad's ties." She stared at it for a long moment, then looked at my mother with a sigh of theatrical sympathy. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice cloying. "You poor thing. First you lose Thomas, and now you're forced to decorate with his old clothes. If you need money, you know Julian would help. You don't have to live like this." It wasn't an offer of help. It was a dagger wrapped in velvet, a reminder that in their world, sentiment and creativity were worthless if they didn't come with a price tag. My mother just bowed her head, and I felt a hot, helpless anger rise in my chest. They didn't just mock me. They used my passion as a weapon to wound the people I loved. Despite it all, or perhaps because of it, I clung to my craft. It was the one part of my life they couldn't touch, the one place where I was in control. I poured all my grief and frustration into my work, and I became exceptionally good. I won a scholarship to Parsons in New York, a fact my family greeted with performative surprise. "Art school? How lovely for you, Ingrid," Alistair had said during a stilted phone call. "It's good to have a passion. Genevieve and I are off to Wharton, of course. Someone has to learn how to run a real business, after all." The implication was clear. I was indulging in a fantasy while they were preparing for the real world. When I graduated with honors and a small award-winning collection, I made one last, foolish attempt to bridge the chasm between us. Julian had just retired, and Genevieve and Alistair were the new co-COS of the House of Valyrian. I requested a meeting. I put together a portfolio not of my school projects, but of new ideas specifically for them. Designs that were modern and elegant, but with a focus on sustainable materials, upcycled fabrics, innovative plant-based leathers, non-toxic dyes. I thought, naively, that this was a way for Valyrian to evolve, to connect with a new generation. I thought it was a way for me to finally prove my worth. I walked into the sleek, intimidatingly minimalist boardroom at their headquarters. They kept me waiting for 20 minutes before sweeping in, all business and feigned importance. Genevieve took the portfolio, her long, manicured nails tapping impatiently on the cover. She flipped through the pages with a speed that told me she wasn't really looking. Alistair leaned over her shoulder, a bored expression on his face. "Ingrid, Genevieve said, closing the portfolio with a soft thud that sounded like a coffin lid closing. She pushed it back across the vast mahogany table towards me. This is charming. It was her go-to word of dismissal. But we sell luxury, Ingrid, not virtue signaling. Alistair chimed in, picking up where she left off. Our clients aren't interested in dresses made of pineapple leaves and recycled plastic bottles. They want exclusivity. They want aspiration. Burlap and hemp? This isn't the House of Valerian. This is a farmer's market. He smirked. Genevieve delivered the final blow. The vision is muddled, but your technical skills are clearly very neat. She smiled a thin, patronizing smile. I'll tell you what. We have a backlog in the archives department. Some of the original Elodie gowns have seams that are starting to fray. Perhaps you could help with the mending? That seems much more your speed. I sat there, frozen, the heavy portfolio feeling like a block of cement in my lap. Mending? After everything, after years of honing my craft, they were offering me a job as a repair girl. They weren't just rejecting my ideas, they were rejecting my entire being, packaging their contempt as a favor. I managed to nod, to gather my things, to walk out of that boardroom without letting them see the tears welling in my eyes. I didn't let them fall until I was safely on the subway. The portfolio clutched to my chest like a shield. That rejection was the cruelest thing they had ever done. It was also the best, because as the train rattled through the dark tunnels beneath Manhattan, a new feeling began to smolder beneath the hurt. Fury. A cold, clean, diamond-hard fury. And in that fury, a decision was made. If they wouldn't let me into their house, I would build my own. That night, I called the one person in the world who had always seen me clearly, my friend Maya. We'd met at Parsons. She was a brilliant marketing student who understood that a brand wasn't just a logo. It was a story. I poured out the whole humiliating tale, my voice cracking with shame and anger. She listened patiently, and when I was done, there was a long pause. Good, she finally said. I was taken aback. Good? Maya, they offered to let me sew up old clothes. I know, she said, her voice electric with energy. So they're idiots. This is good, because now you're free. Now you can stop trying to get their approval and just do the work. Your work. And she was right. Their dismissal was a release. I was finally completely untethered from the weight of their expectations. Maya came over to my tiny Brooklyn apartment, which was more of a studio with a bed in the corner. We sat on the floor, surrounded by my sketches and fabric swatches, and we started to dream. We knew the brand had to be the antithesis of everything the modern House of Valerian stood for. It would be soulful, sustainable, and anonymous. I didn't want my name on it, not the Valerian name that now felt like a brand of shame, nor my own. I wanted the clothes to speak for themselves. Let the work be the celebrity, Maya said. We brainstormed names, and I kept coming back to the earth, to the materials I loved. Atelier Terra, I said, testing the words. Earth's workshop. It felt right. It felt clean. Maya, the digital native, immediately bought the domain name and secured the social media handles. She designed a simple, elegant logo, just the name in a timeless serif font. My job was to create the first piece. I didn't have a budget, so I went back to my roots. I found a bolt of heavy, cream-colored silk charmeuse that had been discarded by a furniture upholsterer because of a slight discoloration on one end. It was glorious. I spent a week dyeing it in my kitchen, using buckets of boiled avocado pits and rusty onion skins, a technique I'd perfected. The fabric transformed, emerging from the dye bath in a stunning, ethereal shade of dusty rose, the color of a faded sunset. It was alive with subtle variations, a story of its own. I designed a simple, bias-cut slip dress, a cascade of liquid silk that moved like water. The seams were flawless, the finishing was couture level. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever made. We took photos of it against a bare concrete wall in my building's basement. Maya uploaded the single photo to the new, anonymous Instagram account, at Atelier Terra. The caption was simple, Forgotten Silk Reborn. We built a minimalist website with a single product page for the dress, made to order. We didn't expect anything. It was an act of defiance, a message in a bottle thrown into the vast ocean of the internet. A week later, we got an email. A sale. We screamed so loud my downstairs neighbor banged on the ceiling. I carefully packed the dress in a box made of recycled cardboard, wrapped it in seeded paper that could be planted, and wrote a handwritten thank you note. That one sale felt more valuable than any Valyrian runway show. It was real. It was mine. Slowly, organically, things started to happen. An indie fashion blogger with a small but devoted following bought a dress and wrote a post raving about the quality and the soul of the brand. An ethical fashion influencer featured us in a story. Then came the first big break. A young, critically acclaimed musician wore one of our pieces on a late-night talk show. The internet went into a frenzy trying to figure out where the dress came from. Our little website, which Maya had thankfully built on a robust server, was flooded with traffic. Orders started pouring in, first dozens, then hundreds. I had to hire a small team of retired seamstresses, women whose incredible skills were being overlooked by the fast fashion industry. We moved into a small, light-filled studio in the garment district. Atelier Terra was growing, all in the shadows, a secret whispered among those in the know. And all the while I remained a ghost. As Atelier Terra's star ascended, the house of Valyrians began to plummet. It was a slow, painful spectacle that I watched from a distance. Genevieve and Alistair were terrible leaders. They had the arrogance of their father, but none of his business acumen, and none of their great-grandmother's soul. Their collections were disastrous. They chased trends with a desperate, clumsy energy, slapping the Valyrian logo onto everything from tracksuits to garish sneakers. They tried to be edgy, but they were just cringeworthy. There was a particularly painful interview they gave to a mid-tier fashion blog, where Alistair, trying to sound profound, said, "The Valyrian ethos is about the aspirational disruption of the heritage luxury paradigm." The blogger just blinked at him, and the comment section was brutal. Genevieve, in the same interview, announced, "We're pivoting to a more synergistic, content-driven, direct-to-consumer model." It was a word salad of business school jargon that meant absolutely nothing. They were cosplaying as executives, and the industry could see right through it. The financial news started to reflect their failure. Headlines in Women's Wear Daily and the Business of Fashion told the story. House of Valyrian stock tumbles after disappointing Q3 results. Valyrian deep in debt, seeking new investors. Is the Gilded Age over for the House of Valyrian? I would read these articles on my phone during my lunch break, a strange cocktail of emotions churning in my gut. There was a bitter taste of vindication, a grim satisfaction in seeing their arrogance meet its consequence. But beneath that was a deep, aching sadness for Elodie, for my father, for the true legacy that was being tarnished and erased by their incompetence. Atelier Terra, in stark contrast, was becoming a phenomenon. Vogue ran a 2-page spread titled, "The Quiet Revolution. Is the anonymous Atelier Terra the future of luxury?" They called the brand a soulful rebuke to the empty branding of our time. Critics praised the meticulous craftsmanship, the innovative use of sustainable materials, and the sheer, unadulterated beauty of the designs. The anonymity was a key part of the mystique. Without a face or a personality to focus on, people were forced to look at the clothes themselves. The irony reached a new peak during a rare, mandatory family dinner at the Valyrian mansion. My mother insisted I go, for the sake of appearances. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Alistair was drinking expensive scotch like it was water. Genevieve was picking at her food, her face a mask of strained composure. They were talking about their dire financial situation, and then, inevitably, they brought up my secret. "This Atelier Terra," Alistair spat, his voice thick with envy. "They're everywhere. Who the hell are they? It's probably some tech billionaire's wife with a guilty conscience and a team of ghost designers." Genevieve sighed dramatically. "Their whole brand is so sanctimonious. Forgotten silk reborn," she mocked, her voice a nasal imitation of our Instagram caption. "It's brilliant marketing, I'll give them that. But it's a gimmick. Who could possibly build a business that way? It's not sustainable." I was standing by the sideboard, refilling the water glasses, a ghost in my own story, listening to them dissect and dismiss my life's work. I had to focus all my energy on keeping my hands steady on maintaining a neutral, pleasant expression. Inside, I was vibrating with a wild, hysterical laughter. It's not sustainable, I thought. Oh, you just wait. The collision course was set a few months later when the theme for the Met Gala was announced: Future Fables, Craftsmanship in a New Age. It was as if the theme had been written for Atelier Terra. Maya called me, screaming with excitement. This is it, Ingrid. This is our moment. The world is finally speaking our language. I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. And then the universe sent me the perfect messenger. An email appeared in the Atelier Terra inbox, not from a publicist or an agent, but from Ilara Vance herself. Ilara Vance wasn't just the biggest actress in the world. She was a force of nature, a brilliant performer known for her intelligence, her fierce advocacy for environmental causes, and her impeccable, daring style. She wrote that she had been a quiet admirer of our work for a year, and that she would be honored to wear a custom Atelier Terra gown to the Met Gala. I met her in secret at her private residence in the city. I was so nervous my hands were shaking as I rang the bell. But Ilara was warm, down to earth, and incredibly sharp. She wasn't interested in being dressed. She was interested in a collaboration. We spent hours talking not just about the dress, but about art, sustainability, and the pressures of being a woman in a male-dominated industry. She told me a story about how, early in her career, a powerful director told her she was too intellectual to be a leading lady. He meant it as an insult, she said with a wry smile, but I decided to take it as my mission statement. I saw a flicker of my own story in hers, and I found myself opening up, telling her everything. About my family, the quaint hobbies, the constant, casual dismissals. She listened, her gaze intense and empathetic. When I finished, she looked at the sketches I'd brought for her gown. This is genius, Ingrid, she said quietly. And they are fools. But the world needs to see the genius. Not just the dress. They need to see you. It was her idea. The reveal. You'll be my guest, she said, her eyes gleaming with a conspiratorial fire. And when they ask me who I'm wearing, I'm going to tell them. All of them. While I was secretly meeting with Ilara, my cousins were in a state of freefall. Their PR team was desperately trying to get a celebrity, any celebrity, to wear Valerian to the gala. I knew this because my mother, in her attempts to foster family unity, would forward me their increasingly frantic group emails. We saw screenshots of their rejection letters. One agent had replied with a single, brutal sentence: "Valerian is not a brand my client wishes to be associated with at this time." They were radioactive. Their last, pathetic hope was to attach themselves to the one brand that was generating all the buzz. One afternoon, an email landed in the Atelier Terra inbox that made my blood run cold. It was from Genevieve Valerian, co-CEO of the House of Valerian. It was a formal, groveling proposal. "Dear Atelier Terra," it began, "we are profound admirers of your disruptive and authentic voice in the luxury space. We believe a strategic partnership between the heritage and legacy of the House of Valerian and the modern, sustainable vision of Atelier Terra would represent a powerful synergy. We would be honored to discuss a potential collaboration." I read it aloud to Maya, and we both burst out laughing. The corporate jargon, the desperate attempt to leech off my success, it was pathetic. "Oh, now they want to synergize with you," Maya cackled. I dragged the email to the trash without a second thought. The night before the Met Gala, my mother guilted me into one last family dinner. It was a wake. The cousins were pale and drawn, drinking heavily. They had officially failed to secure a celebrity placement. Their last-ditch effort to contact Atelier Terra had been met with silence. They were facing ruin, and they were looking for a target for their bitterness. As usual, they found me. "Well, Ingrid," Alistair slurred, gesturing at me with his glass. "Still playing with your little threads? Maybe you can sew us a golden parachute." I ignored him. But then Genevieve, her eyes cold and sharp with resentment, honed in on my hands. I'd been working with walnut husks all day, and my fingers were stained a deep, earthy brown. "Ugh, what is that on your hands?" she sneered, recoiling as if I were contaminated. "It looks like you've been digging in the dirt. For God's sake, Ingrid, could you at least try to look presentable?" We still have a family name to uphold, even if you clearly don't care. Digging in the dirt. That was all she saw. I didn't say a word. I simply excused myself and went home to my studio. The gown for Alara was hanging on a dress form in the center of the room, shimmering under the lights. It was a masterpiece, crafted from panels of piece silk, dyed in shades of moonstone and twilight, and intricately embroidered with a celestial map made from thousands of tiny, reclaimed river pearls. It was a story of the cosmos, spun from the earth. I stood before it, my stained hands trembling, not with fear or hurt, but with a cold, crystalline resolve. You think I've been digging in the dirt? I thought, a slow, dangerous smile touching my lips. You have no idea what I've been growing. I took a needle, threaded it with a single silver strand, and sewed the final, invisible stitch into the lining. The dress was ready. So was I. The night of the Met Gala arrived, a storm of flashing lights and breathless commentary. My cousins, Genevieve and Alastair, were not on the red carpet. They were entombed in the sterile grandeur of their penthouse apartment, a place that now felt more like a mausoleum for their failed ambitions. They were watching the live feed on an 85-inch screen, nursing glasses of expensive champagne that had long gone flat. The air was thick with the stench of despair and stale perfume. Their company was hemorrhaging money. Their name was a joke in the industry, and this night felt like a final, public flogging. Their only sliver of hope, their only morbid curiosity, was to finally see the face behind Atelier Terra. Perhaps they could still poach them, beg them, throw what little money they had left at them for a collaboration that could save them from ruin. They were watching the screen like starving wolves, waiting for a scrap of information. I was not with them. I was in a suite at the Mark Hotel with Alara Vance. I wasn't wearing a gown. I had made myself a suit from a midnight blue bamboo silk, tailored to perfection. It was simple, elegant, and powerful. It felt like armor. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage of my own making. Are you ready? Alara asked, her eyes searching mine in the mirror. She looked ethereal, a goddess from another world in the gown we had created together. I took a deep breath, the scent of her perfume and the static energy of the moment filling my lungs. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. But it doesn't matter. She smiled, a flash of pure, unadulterated confidence. Good, she said. Let's go make them sorry. On the television, the commentators were losing their minds. And then, Alara Vance arrived. A collective gasp seemed to ripple through the crowd, an audible wave of awe that even the television microphones picked up. The dress was everything I had hoped it would be. It moved like liquid moonlight, the thousands of tiny pearls catching the camera flashes like a private constellation. It was a work of art, and it was undeniably, unmistakably, an Atelier Terra creation. In their penthouse, my cousins leaned forward, their faces illuminated by the glow of the screen. My God, Alastair breathed, his voice a dry rasp. That's it. That's them. Genevieve was silent, her eyes wide, a toxic cocktail of raw jealousy and desperate admiration swirling in their depths. The drapery, she whispered, her voice filled with a reverence she had never once shown me. Look at that bias cut. That's old world technique. That's not something you learn in a classroom. They were analyzing my soul's work, praising the very skills they had spent a lifetime mocking, and they had no idea. I walked a few steps behind Alara, my hand barely brushing her elbow. I was her guest, the anonymous +1. The cameras, for the most part, skirted around me, their lenses hungry only for the star and her celestial gown. On the screen, I was just a blurry figure in the background. Genevieve might have glanced at me for a half second. Who's that with her? She probably muttered to Alastair. Her assistant? A publicist. It wouldn't have even registered. I was invisible to them, as I had always been. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt a surge of panic, a primal urge to turn and run, to retreat back into the shadows where it was safe. But then I looked at Alara, saw the defiant tilt of her chin, and I felt the cool, smooth fabric of my own suit against my skin. I remembered my stained hands. I remembered Genevieve's sneer. Digging in the dirt, The panic subsided, replaced by an icy calm. A famous red carpet host, a woman whose opinion could make or break a brand, intercepted them, her microphone extended like a scepter. Ilara, Ilara, you have silenced the carpet. An absolute vision. The world is dying, positively dying to know. Who are you wearing? This was the moment. In their apartment, Genevieve and Alistair held their breath. Their entire future, every hope and delusion, was hanging on the next few words out of Ilara Vance's mouth. They were perched on the edge of their white leather sofa, their bodies rigid with anticipation. Ilara Vance bestowed $1 million smile upon the host, a smile that owned every camera on that carpet. She paused for a beat, letting the tension build to an unbearable peak. Then, instead of answering, she turned slightly. She reached back and gently took my arm, pulling me forward from the shadows and into the full, blinding glare of the spotlight. The cameras, startled, had to quickly refocus, to widen their shot to include this unexpected new subject. I blinked against the sudden onslaught of flashes. The world dissolved into a sea of strobing white light. Ilara's grip on my arm was firm, grounding. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice clear and ringing, carrying over the cacophony. "It's by Atelier Terra, of course." She paused again, letting the name hang in the air. Then she looked directly at me, her smile softening into something genuine and warm, before turning back to the host and the millions watching at home. "And the designer is right here," she announced, her voice filled with pride. "My dear friend, Ingrid." The broadcast director must have been a genius of dramatic timing, because the camera immediately cut to a tight shot of my face, then back to Ilara, and then, for a split second, I imagined it cutting to the penthouse across town. I imagined the scene. The sound of Genevieve's champagne flute slipping from her numb fingers, shattering against the cold marble floor. The way Alistair's face would have morphed from greedy anticipation to a mask of slack-jawed, vacant disbelief. I could see them, their arrogant, beautiful faces twisted in confusion, staring at the screen, staring at me. The host, a consummate professional, was momentarily stunned into silence. Her eyes darted from Ilara to me, a flicker of recognition dawning. "Ingrid," she stammered, recovering. "Ingrid Valerian?" And Ilara, beaming like a proud warrior, tightened her grip on my arm and delivered the final, perfect kill shot. The one and only. The world erupted. Or at least, my small corner of it did. My phone, which I'd wisely given to Maya for the evening, began to vibrate itself into a state of nuclear fusion inside her purse. From the corner of my eye, I saw her look down at the screen, her eyes going wide before she broke into a triumphant grin. The red carpet became a blur of noise and questions. Ingrid Valerian, is it true? Why the anonymity? What does this mean for the House of Valerian? I was swept up in a current I couldn't control, but Ilara was my anchor. She steered me through the chaos with the practiced grace of a queen, deflecting the more invasive questions and answering for me when I was too overwhelmed to speak. Later that night, tucked into a quiet booth at Ilara's exclusive after-party, the adrenaline finally began to recede, leaving behind not a feeling of giddy triumph or vengeful glee, but something far more profound, a quiet, bone-deep sense of peace. It was the feeling of a story finally being told correctly, the feeling of rightness. For Genevieve and Alistair, it was the opposite. Their world, already crumbling, imploded completely. Their phones were the ones they couldn't escape. Calls from their board members, their creditors, from outraged journalists, and of course from their father, whose apoplectic rage I could only imagine. Their first dozen calls, naturally, were to me. I watched my phone screen light up with their names, again and again. Asterisk Genevieve, Alistair, Genevieve cell, Alistair work, asterisk I let each one go to voicemail. Then the text began, a rapid-fire descent through the stages of their panic. The first was demanding, "Ingrid, call us immediately. We need to talk." The second was laced with familial obligation. "This is a family matter. You need to speak with us." The third was pure, petulant accusation. "How could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you." That last one almost made me laugh. Everything you've done for me, They had done more for me than they could ever possibly know. Their cruelty had been my crucible. The next morning, the news cycle was a firestorm. The Met Gala Cinderella story, how a forgotten Valyrian heir secretly conquered the fashion world. Atelier Terra's Ingrid Valerian, the quiet genius who let her work speak for itself. My face, my name, my story, it was everywhere. They called me the rebel Valerian, the sustainable savior. The narrative was set, and it was one they couldn't control. 3 days later, they showed up at my studio. They didn't call. They just appeared, standing in the doorway like ghosts at the feast. It was the first time they had ever set foot in my workspace. They looked terrible. The arrogant gloss had been stripped away, leaving behind a raw, haggard desperation. They were trying to smile, trying to affect an air of warm, familial pride, but it was a grotesque pantomime. Ingrid, Genevieve began, her voice unnaturally soft. We are just so incredibly proud. We had no idea you were capable of all this. It's breathtaking. Alistair nodded eagerly, his eyes scanning my studio, not with appreciation, but with the avaricious glint of a man calculating assets. Breathtaking, he echoed. Ingrid, we have to talk. Seriously, a collaboration. Valerian and Terra. We can merge. We can save the family legacy. Think of what we could build. Together. I had been rehearsing this conversation in my head for years. I thought I would be angry, that I would yell, that I would list every single one of their slights like a prosecutor. But when the moment came, I was perfectly calm. The fury had burned away, leaving behind the cool, hard clarity of truth. I gestured for them to come in, but I didn't offer them a seat. I stood in the center of my studio, surrounded by the evidence of my life's work. The bolts of naturally dyed fabric, the sketches, the dress forms draped in half-finished creations. Together, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. That's interesting, because I seem to recall trying to do this together once before. I walked over to a dusty portfolio case in the corner and pulled out the presentation I had shown them all those years ago. I laid it on my cutting table. I showed you this, I said, my voice even and quiet. My ideas, my vision. And you, I looked at Genevieve, told me it was charming. And you, I turned to Alistair, told me it was for a farmer's market. They flinched as if I'd struck them. And then, I continued, my voice unwavering, you offered me a job mending old clothes in the archive. You told me it was more my speed. Their faces paled. They had probably forgotten the exact words, but I never had. They were etched into my memory. You laughed at my hobby. You were embarrassed by my homemade clothes. You sneered at my stained hands just last week and told me I looked like I'd been digging in the dirt. Genevieve opened her mouth to speak, to offer some weak denial, but I held up a hand. I have been digging in the dirt, Genevieve. I've been building a garden while you were busy poisoning the soil of the one you were given. The House of Valerian, as you've made it, is not a legacy I have any interest in saving. It is a hollowed-out shell filled with bad debt and worse ideas. Atelier Terra is mine. It was built on integrity, on respect for the materials, on all the principles you and your father threw away in your pursuit of status. It is not a lifeline. It is not for sale. And it will not be collaborating with you. I paused, letting the finality of my words settle in the quiet room. I think you should go now. For the first time in their lives, they did as they were told. They turned and walked away, not with anger, but with the slow, shuffling gait of the utterly defeated. A year can change everything. 1 year after that night at the Met Gala, Atelier Terra was no longer a secret. It was a global brand, but one that operated on its own terms. We never sold out to a conglomerate. We never chased trends. We grew slowly, intentionally. My face was on the cover of Forbes, not as a socialite, but as an innovator. I had moved into a new, sprawling atelier in a repurposed warehouse in Brooklyn, a space filled with light and air and the quiet hum of creation. I'd used the profits to launch the Elodie Foundation, a nonprofit that gave grants and mentorship to young, independent artisans who were working with sustainable and traditional craft methods. I was honoring the true legacy of my great-grandmother, the one that lived in the skill of human hands, not in a logo on a handbag. The House of Valerian was gone. They filed for bankruptcy 6 months after the Met Gala. The name, the archives, the very brand itself, all liquidated to pay off their mountains of debt. The Valerian name was no longer a symbol of luxury. It was a case study taught in business schools on how arrogance and a lack of vision can destroy a legacy. I never saw Alistair again. He reportedly moved to Singapore to try his hand at cryptocurrency. But about a month ago, a letter arrived at my studio. It was from Genevieve. It wasn't written on expensive, embossed stationery, but on a single sheet of simple, lined paper. Her handwriting was unfamiliar, stripped of its usual flamboyant loops. She wrote that she was working as an assistant manager at a boutique hotel in Vermont. She wrote that for the first time in her life, she was building something on her own, however small. The letter was short, and it asked for nothing. But it ended with 3 words I never thought I would read from her. I am sorry. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't feel forgiveness, not exactly. But I felt a sense of closure, the quiet turning of a final page. Sometimes I stand at the vast window of my studio, looking out over the city. I think about the long, winding path that brought me here. I think about the years I spent craving a single word of approval from them, a crumb of validation from their table. And I realize now that their mockery was the greatest gift they ever gave me. Their dismissal was my liberation. By shutting their door in my face, they forced me to build my own, and my door opens onto a world they could never have imagined. They saw me as the poor relation, the girl playing with rags, and they never once stopped to consider that my quaint skills were the only real inheritance left in our entire family. They thought I was the ghost, but I was the one who was truly alive all along. So, what do you think? Was I right to turn my back on them completely? Or is family always worth saving, no matter the cost? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts, so please share your story or your opinion in the comments below. Have you ever had a passion that someone else dismissed, only to see it become your greatest strength? Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and please subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your way. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. Remember, sometimes the people who believe in you the least end up giving you the most motivation. And family isn't just the one you're born into. It's the one you build from love, respect, and shared creation. Thank you for listening.